Today's topic is about the new art gallery opened downtown called Everyday Lusaka, founded and managed by Miss Sana Ginwalla, an artist herself, curator, archivist, designer, lecturer at Open Window University, and a creative writer. Sana is also founder of the counter archive called Zambia Belonging. Her artistic platforms focus on visual representation of Zambia's past and present to build a contemporary current archive for future generations. Sana is joined by Mr. William Bawaya Miko, a veteran in the art field himself and a practicing curator. He is a visual artist and a global art and culture consultant. He currently lectures at Open Window University in Lusaka, Zambia.
I'm Sana Ginwalla and you're watching Tandala with Dr. Ayan.
I'm William Miko and you're watching Tandala with Dr. Ayan.
Welcome to another episode of Tandala with Dr. Ayan. Today we have two special guests that are very well known in the creative arts industry here in Zambia and abroad, Ms. Sana Ginwalla and Mr. William Miko. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So the art industry is not really talked about, but it's been around for centuries in Africa, right? So as two people who are involved in the creative arts industry in all its aspects, let's start off with the general question of what is art? What is art? And how does that connect to specifically Zambian culture, Zambian history, and even Zambia's future?
I think art can simply be defined as the creative aspects of us as human beings. Things that we do to record, things that we do when we are excited and even when we are sad. So basically, art is our expressive side of our lives as a people, or as human beings.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I also think that art is a language that is much more universal, especially if you look at visual art, music, dance. It's something that once you view it and you interact with it, it's something that the universe or like everybody in the space can understand.
Yeah.
It doesn't require any schooling. It's
Yeah.
just something you feel.
Yeah.
So I think that's the power of the arts. It's something that can be very universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the different diverse forms of art, centuries ago it was a form of language. Stones were used, written work. People often forget writing is also a form of art.
Yeah.
So any form of expression, you use the
Yes.
word expression.
Yes, that's right.
So is art subjective or is it objective?
It's both.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's both. It can be subjective, it can be objective as well,
Yeah.
because it is something that comes out of emotions, you know, and emotions can be intended or emotions can be unintended. So
Yeah.
basically, it's something that comes out of what people experiences throughout their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it for the artist that's creating, and both of you are artists in your own right, is it considered a safe space to express? Is it a safe space to express, or is it just creativity coming into its form?
You know, maybe.
It's so subjective. It's kind of hard to fully define it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in today's age, and I think actually throughout the times, any form of expression that might be controversial
Yeah.
or in protest to something can be seen as an offense or as a threat. But for the most part, art is the way in which people really express what perhaps the mass can't express. And I also think that it's always open to interpretation. So in the same way as you said that writing is a form of art, it's a form of language, so is art. And so I might make something in a very objective way,
Yeah.
but it may not be interpreted in that way.
Yeah.
Or so I think it is meant to be a safe space, whatever your art form is. Whether you're using a canvas, you're singing, you're dancing, it should be a space in which you are able to express things that you may publicly not be able to express in a safe space. But how that's interpreted could be seen by others in a different way.
So it's a sense of freedom of the artist.
Yes. Yeah.
But the interpretations can be very varying. That's where the subjectiveness comes in.
Yes, exactly, because sometimes it's entertaining.
Yes.
Sometimes it questions the society, just as much as sometimes it can be very controversial.
Yeah, and just puzzling sometimes, because everyone's interpretations can be different. Yeah. Like abstract art of paintings and so forth. I have to like find the story in it. But the art of dance and the art of singing and so forth, it's easy for me to connect. Like I can pick up on what's being translated, right? So thank you so much for that broad definition of that. Right now I'm going to direct my questions at you. I know he's your mentor, and he was there at the opening. She had a gallery, art gallery in downtown Lusaka called Everyday Lusaka. So before we get into those questions, let's get to know a little bit about Sana.
Fantastic.
Okay, so Sana, you're basically involved in all different types of art forms: fashion, art, writing, curating, and what else? You're doing it all.
Yeah.
You're doing it all.
Thank you.
What was the spark that got you into this vast area of creative arts?
Thank you so much. I think I've always been interested in art as a child, so it was a natural inclination. So in the same way that you are naturally inclined to music or dance, I always had a natural inclination to art as a child. And I remember my sister asking me in like grade 6, what do you want to be when you're big, when you're grown up? And the first thing I remember saying to her was that I want to be an artist. And she asked me a question back. She's like, well, what is your art going to say? What is it going to mean? And that still stays with me till today, because it drives forth the work that I do. But I think when it became a bit more prominent in my life is when she actually gifted me a camera when I was 13, like a handheld camera. And it was around the time where I was already becoming very interested in old photographs from my own family, and I encountered many photographs that my father took, because he was a keen photographer and is still one. And so when he saw that I was really excited by this gift, he encouraged me to continue photographing, and I never stopped. So from 13, 14, 15, I had that camera, that tiny camera, for such a long time, and then it died, and then I wanted another one, and my dad was really supportive and allowed me to continue that passion and taught me a lot about photography. So I would say that's what sparked it, and it sort of continued and entered and left my life in different ways. I became very interested in writing as well in school, and the curatorial work came a bit more later in my life. It was a way in which I wanted to bring all of these interests together in one place, and curatorial work is, I think, a space that allows that. So I hope that kind of answers the question as to what sparked it. It really was the camera and my family, really.
And it kind of opened the doors in your interest in fashion. Curating. Tell us a little about the curating. You travel around the world curating art exhibitions and so forth.
Yes, so I studied photography in my undergraduate, and right after I graduated from the UK, I came back to Zambia, very lost about what to do with this degree, to be very honest. And actually, it's the year that I met Mr. Miko. And the program where I met Mr. Miko was a workshop, a curatorial workshop that was run by Modzi Arts. And that was the first time I met him in 2017, October. And it was a week long. And I had just come out of uni with this photography degree. And it was a space in which I met everyone that you needed to know in the arts. Mr. Miko being one of them, and many other artists who attended the workshop or spoke at the workshop like Mr. Miko did. So I became more aware of what curatorial work is in that context. But then it was the following year in 2018 when I found many photographs from fine art studios in town on Cha-Cha-Cha Road that were uncollected by people. So around 1,000 objects, so photographs and papers and letters that were not collected by people and were going to be gotten rid of, basically. They didn't have a home. And I became instantly inspired by these images, but I also felt this sense of loss because these are stories and memories of people that were just displaced. And so they kind of needed a narrative and a story, and that really is what curatorial work is making connections between things and finding a way to give it a bit of structure and care. So that's what really pushed me into the curatorial work. It wasn't something I intended. It was more like I happened upon a collection that needed the care of a curator. And that's how I ended up studying further into curatorship at the University of Cape Town the following year in 2019. So it really merged my interest in photography and archival photography and Zambian history just by entering that studio, because all the images there were of everyday people, but also of people that were publicly known. You know, obviously Dr. Kaunda and all of the cabinet ministers, as well as people like Paul Ngozi. So it was a studio that really had so many different people navigating through it and told the history, the everyday history of Zambians, which is not something I saw a lot of in institutional archives, for example.
So it's like those internal collective compasses that kind of drew all you guys together.
Exactly.
Yeah, and from the sound of it, you have like a social purpose for it. It's not just art, you know, but there's a purpose behind it, and that's what really wonderful. So one thing I know about you, Sana, because we lecture at the same university, is that you have a deep love not only for the arts, but you have a deep love for Zambia. You are Zambian born, okay? So tell us a little bit about how your parents, how your family journeyed to Zambia, and then as a young woman born here, how do you balance being Zambian and still holding on to your Indian identity?
That's a great question. I'll start by saying that what you've asked me is my entire life's work. Exploring this idea of belonging and identity is the entirety of what I'm trying to unpack. The idea of belonging, you know, relationship to land and people. How does art allow a space to communicate that? So it's not something that is straightforward. It's not linear. But to answer your question, my parents moved to Zambia in the early 90s, but they were born in Burma or Myanmar. But they're originally Indian. So they were born to parents who were born in India. My mom was born to parents born in Burma, but they're Indian diasporas in Burma. And then my dad moved to India, and my mom remained in Burma, and then to look for a better life, they joined our extended family and my dad's late brother here in the 90s. So my family has had a migration from Burma to India, well, rather from India to Burma, back to India, and now to Zambia. And then I was born here. So in my immediate family, I'm the first person to be born here. And within my lineage, there hasn't been more than one generation. Like each generation has moved to a different country. So the story, my family history is one of lots of migration and lots of movement. But the biggest one is out of Asia into Africa, which, as we know, historically was what was happening during the colonial period. But my family moved in the 90s. So their relationship to India and their relationship to Burma becomes my relationship as well. I inherit that relationship, whether it's because of the language we speak at home, the food we eat at home, how often we visit these countries. But as you said, I was born and raised here. So how I feel that I belong is often rooted here. But it's only when I left Zambia for the first time that I realized how Zambian I really was and how Indian perhaps I wasn't. So there's a lot of perception change that I had within myself before dealing with how people perceived me initially, whether it was as an Indian or not, or as a Zambian or not. And so a lot of my work deals with this. What does it actually mean to be Zambian? What does it mean to be Indian? What does it mean to be Burmese, to be Somali, to be Egyptian? Whatever it is, how are we understanding this idea of nationhood? And what defines it? Is it a passport? Is it my ability to speak the language?
Is it borders?
Is it borders? Is it race? Because race plays a big part in how people perceive where you belong or don't belong. So these are the aspects that I became very interested in when I was in university.
Yeah.
And it's what Mr. Miko came to know about my work initially as well, was when I created bodies of work exploring this.
Yeah.
And that's what has continued as a theme in all of my curatorial and artistic work, is this idea of belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Thank
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the whole concept of migration,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
How we can grow roots everywhere we go. You know how like a tree has like all these different veins?
Yes, yes.
You know, so Africa in general and like the beginning of times, there were no borders, particularly in Africa, there were no borders. People moved around, journeyed
Yes.
around, and they settled where they felt comfortable.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it's just kind of interesting how things changed. But
Yes.
when you bring the art into it, it kind of forces you to think about that. Like
Yes.
we kind of perceptually see and understand, oh, you're Zambian, you're also Indian, I'm Somali, I'm also American,
Yes.
now adopted Zambian.
yes,
You know,
yeah.
so it makes you think about that whole concept of migration.
Yes,
so it's very, very
definitely.
fascinating. Okay, so both of you, tell us about Lusaka belonging. How did that come up to be? And is this the beginning of something exciting for
Yeah.
Zambia?
Yes.
Maybe what I should do is, you know, in the first place we defined what art is. Art is a human story. And my relationship with Sana is that of a human story.
Yes.
And she picks it up from the time I think she grows up and then begins to, you know, develop professionally. We meet in the workshop. But basically, it goes beyond that. And this is the power of art. I've been, you know, teaching at the Zambian Open University, and one of my students went to teach at the school where she was, in the primary school, and invited me to visit. And as I visited the classroom, there was this group of pupils here at
International school.
International School.
Yeah.
And there was this shy-looking, smallish Indian child.
Was that Sana?
And she's the only one who asked me a very funny question. I don't remember the question, but I remember the image of this child. And later on, that was Sana. You know, and she was so enthusiastic and elated with me visiting the classroom, or, you know, the art, and she was quite busy but very shy.
Yeah.
And later when she comes back from England from her studies, and then I realized, no, wait a minute, there's that child that has stuck in my head. This is her. And
It's
I
like full
said,
circle.
yes. And I said, did you go to international school? She said, yes. Who was your art teacher? She mentions my student,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Banda. And I said, wow. So it's you now. So that's how far back, you know,
Wow.
my story, you know, comes with, you know, Sana. And then she has carried on this vibrance and, you know, the idea of being born in Zambia and of Indian, you know, she's supposed to be on the till selling things in Ginwalla, but she just goes haywire into the arts.
Yeah.
And ever since I knew her when she came back from England, I've been begging her and said, look, Indians are so shy here. They're just busy making money. But they don't tell their story. You better use your art to tell the story. And, you know, so it starts unfolding from there.
Yeah.
And then she comes up with this idea of opening up a gallery in a very historic building that belongs to, you know, the family. They give her the space there.
Tell us about the building.
Yeah, the building is one of the first buildings, I think, on Cairo Road. It's very much related, related to the coming of Cecil Rhodes. At one time, Cecil Rhodes used that building.
Yeah.
And if you go inside, you're even going to find some of those very, very early, you know, strong doors written on E.W. Taris from, you know, South Africa. And it's a very historic space. And that's where now she chooses to open up this gallery where she should tell the story of Everyday Lusaka. It's very interesting, you know, you see people pop in and out. They think they're going to find the merchandise there only to see the art. So it's a very creative thing that Sana has started, and we hope that it's a gallery that is going to play intermediaries between the very ordinary street patron and the ordinary person,
Yeah.
You find people walk in, they
Yeah.
expect merchandise, only to find there's art, and then they say, "Wow, where are the goods?"
Yeah.
And then you begin the story. Oh, these are the goods hanging on the wall,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
So,
Yeah.
so Zambia Belonging is one of the exhibitions, but Everyday Lusaka
Yeah.
is a gallery.
gallery.
Is a gallery.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what's your vision for the gallery moving forward?
So Everyday Lusaka has started since 2018. So the gallery is the first time it has a physical space. So in 2018 when we began, this was the 5-year plan actually. The vision I had was a gallery space. But long-term speaking in a much more broad conceptual sense, it's to really first of all, why it began and what it continues to be about, and its vision continues to be about how are we telling the stories of Lusaka and Zambia in a manner that is much more progressive and not perpetuating the visions that people have of Africa. How are we writing against those stereotypes that we have about Africa that we historically used to make Africa seem like a weak counterpart in global politics? So it really is about showing what is the everyday of this city and who are the key players in this, who are the people, who are the artists telling these stories in a manner that is much more authentic and again, telling a positive narrative about Lusaka without overly glorifying it and without making it too much about the wildlife or the sunsets or the poverty. While we have these as realities in Africa, we need to also shift the lens about what else is happening, because that is already what the trope is, what the narrative is that has been shared about African cities. So the project really takes this intellectual heritage from a project called Everyday Africa, which started in 2013. And around the world there's Everyday Mumbai, Everyday Kigali, Everyday Nairobi. So it's a global project, and Everyday Lusaka was the best way I could think about how photography can be used differently in the country. So it has a very photographic foundation, but it's open to artists who are telling a different story about Zambia or about their experience as a Zambian. It's very broad in terms of the artists we're working with, but the vision in general is to really put Zambia on the map as a key stakeholder of arts in the Southern African region, because we have so much talent in Zambia. I mean, you and I both know that with Open Window and all the students we have. Such brilliant talent. But when we look at what's happening on the continent, Zambia is not yet at the stage where we're being paid attention to as a stakeholder of arts, or as a country that has art as a big export. So in terms of the gallery starts to become a space in which that becomes possible in a practical manner, in terms of allowing artists from Zambia to connect to global markets, to connect to international clienteles, because galleries are, that's the main role of a gallery really, is obviously to make sales, to show works, but for a country like Zambia, it means being able to hopefully represent artists outside of the country, and not in a manner that obsesses with internationalism, but more about having global representation. Because a lot of artists are not supported by galleries in Zambia that can do that for them. They usually have to take themselves to residency programs and to art fairs and things like this. Of course, there are wonderful galleries in Zambia that have been doing this to some extent for the past couple of years, but the main focus for this gallery is really trying to, on the ground, as Mr. Miko said, have a social
it's more
enterprise.
intimate.
Yeah,
It seems like it's a more
social,
intimate type
an
of...
intimate sort
Exactly.
of way.
Yeah.
But the behind the scenes, the much bigger vision is how are we connecting artists to an art market that allows their work to be compensated the way it needs to. So really, there's a much larger economic model that I'm trying to sort of build in terms of how art can become exported and brought back into the country to create it, the biggest problem we have is that artists are not really financially supported, and they're not really in a position to find a way to create structure in doing that. But when you have a gallery or when you have an institution that can do that for you, you're able to have an ecosystem that allows you to be encouraged to continue producing art, sell it, and then be able to continue producing. There has to be a sort of ecosystem. But the problem is that we kind of reach a stagnancy when there isn't resources to do that, to continue making. So that's the vision that I have for the gallery. And again, I mean, on the day-to-day, in the everyday for the gallery, it's really to allow it to intersect with the everyday Zambian.
Yes.
Let art be something that intersects in the everyday life of a commuter, of a vendor, of an art patron, of a student.
Yes.
And that's what's happening since we opened the gallery. So.
And in fact, maybe I can add on there,
Yeah,
just on that point San has mentioned, it's very interesting when you look at the location of the gallery in the, city center, and you see that when she invited me to curate the show, when we were putting up the show, I remember one of the guards looking at the space, and then he says, "Oh, well, when are the goods arriving?" So the paintings were already, the prints were already hanging, and because the floor was empty, he didn't see them. So then I tell him, the goods are already here. Then he says to me, when I see around, I can only see a stool there and maybe pictures. I said, yes, these are the goods here. So for me, that serves the purpose from the very beginning that here is somebody who only thinks that this space can only be utilized by placing the goods that must be seen. But the concept of showing the image that reflects the life of Zambians, it doesn't see it.
Yeah,
so
that story in itself is a reflection of how distant people have become from the
exactly,
arts.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question about the importance of archiving, which is something both of you are very passionate about. I think you started something else that you're working on to archive a lot of poignant things and artistry and information so that future generations can utilize it. Is there a limitation to what's existing now in creative arts archiving in Zambia, which is one of the reasons why you propelled yourself into this work? So Everyday Lusaka can play a big role in starting that culture of archiving information, archiving images. So just people can reflect back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now and say, oh, wow, Lusaka was like this. People were like this.
Yes, certainly. I mean, this is something that I share a passion with Mr. Miko. We talk about how these are the gaps in our remembering that we need to sort of meet. And we can't really cry over spilt milk, over work that hasn't been documented yet. But if we know that we can't access those things from the past, we need to start archiving our everyday. So Everyday Lusaka has a counter archive called Zambia Belonging, which is what we opened the show with images from this collection. And those 1,000 images that I told you I found from Fine Art Studios are part of that collection. And so there's a collection of photographs in there, there's objects, there's letters, and there's also around 20 Zambian families who consensually also shared their own family stories with us, which is where we met during that exhibition.
Yes, you remember. I was just about to say, that's where I first met you. I was so impressed by you.
Yes, that's where we met. And for me, it was exactly this response of how can I be so connected to my past? Like, why is it that I'm so connected to my past and my heritage and story of migration in my family? And it's really because I had the privilege of accessing my own family archives. And though they're not in any institutional archive per se, but my father, he's a photographer, but also in some way by nature, he's an archivist. So he kept all of these things very well. He scanned a lot of these images. So I was able to connect so much more to the other non-Zambian parts of myself because of this work that I had. And it's something that when I saw those images in Fine Art Studios, I saw the value of what this could do for people in terms of connecting themselves to their past and their heritage. So photographs for me have that power. And so that's really where my work lies in the archival. So Everyday looks at the contemporary lives that we're trying to document, but what also we have access to from the past that we can digitize and keep records of and tell stories of, but also interpret artistically for the present day. So yes, you can have a photograph from the past, but the exhibition that Mr. Miko curated of my family archives and the Fine Art Studio collection were photographs that were screen printed onto a different fabric. And so there's a different way in which you can create materiality and story in how what you do with those photographs. Because a lot of people will ask me, well, you want to scan these images, but what for?
Yeah.
What's the point of it? But there's so much for historians there, for journalists there, for fashion designers there, for artists there, that can be used to understand better. But also sometimes it's just for one's own sense of belonging. It doesn't have to become something that's produced mass or that anybody has to understand. But it can just be like, okay, well, I knew that my grandfather was from XYZ province. Maybe I have a photograph of it, and maybe that can allow you to have a connection to that space or that land. So sometimes it's this intangible value, and that's what I think a lot of people need to understand is the value of art, that sometimes it's not always tangible.
In fact, if I were to add on, you know, accessing archival material, it's very important to be able to know that you can only understand the present when you look in the past. And when you combine the past and the present, then you can shape the future. For instance, if you were to go in the archives that she has digitalized and retrieved from Fine Arts Studio, you are even going to see how you know, the Zambian fashion has moved from the 60s or you know, the 70s, and because in the past, you know, photography as an art has always been a way to document, a way to freeze the present, which now the future can you know, borrow on. If you look at some of the archival materials that she retrieved, you're going to see most of our politicians, they went to the studios. And in fact, even in olden days, it was very fashionable. If you have a girlfriend, you have to take her to the studio, you know, and have a photo. And that photo really played a very important role in your relationship, because it kind of like froze time and marked the time when all your lives, you know, perhaps, you know, arose to another level. So playing around with archiving and retrieving these archival material and putting them into public spaces is very, very important for our existence.
Wow. So my last question to both of you is, let me start with you, Mr. Miko. Since you're like the guru and you've been around in the creative arts for decades, but still young, I'm not trying to call you old. What would you say to Zambians of all ages in terms of how would you get them passionate and interested into creative arts? Is it in the way of supporting, in the way of becoming artists themselves? Like, what could you say to them to pay more attention to the importance of artistry in all forms?
I think when all of us are born, we are born artists, and then society kills us, our artistic talent. Because you'll find parents who say, no, he just likes drawing, or she just likes drawing, and she just likes doing things and stuff like that. Not knowing that that's where the passion of that particular individual child lies. And it's very important to urge the parents, Zambian parents. Geniuses are born everywhere, in every society. Even where there's war, there are geniuses being born, even where there's peace and so on. So perhaps I think the most important thing is to be able to encourage individuals to pursue the careers in which they exhibit talent. Because at the core of every development and advancements, there is talent. I always say that it doesn't matter what you have studied. What matters is what you do with what you have studied. So it's very important to urge the Zambian parents to be able to take children to watch football, to see gallery, to visit museums, to go to church, and so on and so forth, so that you know you expose the young mind to the various creative way of existence.
Very much so. And you, Sana?
I agree with Mr. Miko. I think nurturing creative talent is very important. And once you get to that stage, like how it was for me by my father and my sister, my family, they nurtured that in me. But that's not to say that I did not come across any sort of challenges in still thinking that I had a future in the creative arts. So even once you have the nurturing part, that's step one. But step two is that once you're there, and yes, you have maybe a creative degree or you've sort of produced some works, I think what needs to happen there is you need to be very brave
Yeah.
to take a leap of faith in, first of all, continuing what you're doing, but also sort of pushing it forward in different ways. So
Yeah.
sometimes you have produced work, or you're sort of sitting on work, but you're kind of not courageous enough yet
Yeah.
to make it public, or you're not even courageous enough to get started.
Yeah.
But I think the hardest part is that.
Yeah.
So it's easier said than done,
Yeah.
but if you have an idea in mind, you need to just do it. And I think that's what I had to tell myself a
Yeah.
couple of months ago when I wanted to open the gallery, because I was sitting on this idea for 5 years. And I kept on thinking of excuses as to how it won't work. And I think it reached a point where I realized that I was being an enemy of my own progress. So that's kind of what I would say. Don't be an enemy of your own progress, because you will still have challenges beyond yourself that will prevent things from happening. But really, your own will is what can get you through where you need to be. And if I was looking at this, you know, when I first graduated, I probably would not have believed that this is where I came. But really, people like Mr. Miko.
And it's just the start.
It's just the start. Yeah, people like yourself, you know, have been so encouraging, but also I had to encourage myself to get to where I am today. So I think just keep practicing, and also just take the leap of faith and do the things without waiting for permission or waiting for approval or the right moment. There's no right moment. You just have to make the decision to do it.
I'm just there to support her.
Yeah.
She's an intellectual gangster.
That's my nickname from
Yeah,
Mr.
I love
Miko.
it. I absolutely love it. So what can everyday Zambians,
Oh, I like that.
what can everyday Zambians do to support the creative arts? We'll end up with that.
Oh,
Like come to the gallery would be
Yes.
one.
Yes,
Those
number
are
one,
number-
come to the gallery. It's on Kalundwe Road, shop number 5, off Cairo Road, North End. Come to the gallery, please.
Painted in yellow.
Painted in
Yellow.
yellow, my favorite
When she's
color.
in yellow.
But yes,
Sunshine.
visit art spaces, and if you know a friend, if you know a colleague, an acquaintance who's an artist, and you can see that, you know, they seem to need a bit of encouragement or just any support, that's really what nurtures and fills the cup of artists, is being able to say that, okay, there's value in my work, especially because it's such a niche career. It's not something that's very straightforward. I went through a lot as an Indian studying the arts, justifying why it is I'm not a doctor or a lawyer. So the more you encourage people who are in these sort of non-conventional careers in the arts, the more they'll feel like there's value in what they're doing. And I think each person in society has value to add, and I think artists are definitely part of that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one thing. I mean, there's so many things that Zambians can really do to encourage, and also just reconsider, like, what do you do for entertainment? You listen to music, you go to the cinema. These are all artists behind these crafts.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the things, but I'm sure Mr. Miko.
It's intellectual
I
entertainment.
mean, I can only, you know, what excites me so much about Everyday Lusaka Gallery and Sana's, you know, ideas is that we are actually opening a new paradigm shift, knowing the Indian people far beyond what we know as Kamwala and so. But these are people that are in a lot of things, engineering, law, what have you, and what
Big
not. And
contributors, yes.
they are human beings, and they are part of Zambia's liberation movement.
Yeah.
They've played such a big role. So for me, I see this as a window opening up to Zambians to know even the Indian people, Lusaka people, Zambian people, far beyond this.
So
And
in
the
a
things that
nutshell-
are beyond
Exactly, I love that.
non-discursive areas. And you walk in the gallery without reading anything, your eyes and your mind will feed on something, and to be able to provoke the mind, to be able to question and to be able to find answers and move on with life.
Yes.
Yep.
So in a nutshell, what both of you are saying is celebrate Zambia, celebrate the
exactly.
culture, celebrate the
Exactly.
history, celebrate your own artistry,
Yeah.
and enjoy it. It's
Yes.
like intellectual entertainment.
Yes.
And the arts happen to be just that window.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Well, it was very much a delight.
Thank you so
Sana,
much. Dr.
thank
Ayan.
you so much.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Mr. Milo, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
And we hope
Thank
to
you.
have you back again.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayan.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. What? We did it.
That was a good interview.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
It's done.
Huh?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,